Alrighty, and we are live with, well, there's just the two of us today at Eat Sleep Tennis. Unfortunately, our co-host Alex has some better things to do over in the US today. I don't know if it's just a combination of, I mean, it's probably a little bit annoyed post Philadelphia losing the first game against Atlanta, but we won't go into that with too much detail. We'll keep our focus on the tennis that has been at hand over the last week or so. Candice, how are you doing over there in the States?
Doing well. We are holding up. I have been enjoying the tennis thus far. We've had a little bit of everything, Steve.
There really has, it's been it's been 8 days already. It's been a little bit of a whirlwind, but the fact that there is also a slam starting in 3 weeks from today blows my mind.
Oh yeah.
It's it's interesting kind of keeping an eye on at the moment, obviously what's going on in Roland Garros, but then also we've got, action in Nottingham and Bowl and a couple of other places. So it's certainly been a crazy time in the tennis calendar. But look, compared to last year, I'm just glad there is tennis of some sort that we can talk about and discuss. So I'm not going to complain too much about having too much tennis. I feel like
That's it. That's it. We are very happy.
Yeah, I cannot go down that path. Now, what we thought we would do for today is, obviously the first 8 days of Roland Garros are done, and we just have a little bit of a check-in to see how the draws are looking for both the men's and the women's, maybe how our picks were looking, but also just a bit of a look ahead to, obviously it's very easy before the tournament to be able to come up with a projected quarterfinalists or fourth round players. Obviously, a little bit of water's gone under the bridge, and there's been a couple of surprises over the course of these first 8 days. So we will see and take a little bit of a look at that now. We might start with the men, if that's all right with you, Candice, and I'll get that one up on the screen now. So taking a look at the first quarter. So we've got Novak Djokovic, Lorenzo Musetti, and Matteo Berrettini left in the quarter. So for anyone who hasn't heard the news overnight, Roger Federer has decided that three matches of tennis on clay is enough. He doesn't have an injury as such, but he's just decided that we're just going to pull the pin and the focus really is Wimbledon, which I think we thought was the case, but I guess it's a little bit surprising to see a walkover, I guess, form part of his week. Do you have any thoughts on how that kind of unfolded?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one because he said he needed to listen to his body, and I don't ever want to advocate for people not doing that because that's really important. I think, yeah, we all expected Wimbledon to be where he was aiming towards, and we saw that come to fruition. I guess I just expected him to lose a match, and that I didn't expect the walkover. So that aspect of it was surprising. But if you have a defined goal and that's the path he needs or he feels like he needs to take to get there, then it makes sense. Even better for Berrettini, who hasn't always had the best draws as of late, and so he gets a little bit of a bonus there, and a lucky one, but deserved in that he put himself in that position to take advantage.
Definitely, and look, it has been, as you said, Berrettini through to the quarterfinal. There's a couple of things at play here, I think, from a Federer standpoint. Obviously, that this main draw got pushed back a week initially, due to curfew issues that are obviously still, prevalent at the moment in Paris. So it has pushed it closer to Wimbledon by a week, as we said. So 3 weeks until that kicks off. Berrettini has had a change of fortune, I guess, for his fourth round here compared to the Australian Open, because he did have to withdraw against Stefanos Tsitsipas in Melbourne with an abdominal injury, which was unfortunate. But it's a great opportunity here for Federer to go, okay, Berrettini, you're going to have 3 days off. You're fresh. Have a crack at Novak and see what happens there as well. So obviously Berrettini is the big winner here. But it'll be interesting to see how Musetti goes against Novak. I think he had the outside court crowd with him quite a bit in the previous round, pulled off a couple of miraculous shots. But yeah, it's tough to see him, I guess, challenging Novak in any capacity, given how well Novak's covering the court. I'm a little worried, I guess, for Berrettini. I think a lot of it's obviously going to be dependent on his serve and forehand, but I'd be fascinated to see what kind of price that we're going to actually get for him here, potentially against Novak. Do you see Musetti getting over the total games or snatching a set off Novak?
I don't. It's a tricky thing because he's a player that has a lot of talent. I just think he's a pretty woeful matchup for Djokovic, and it really always has been that way. I mean, this is a guy who, for all of his ability and his variety, and he's been, I mean, A plus plus when he's been coming up to the net in this tournament, and there's some, bonuses to that against Djokovic. But the problem with Musetti against Djokovic, for mine at least, is that Musetti is a very kind of, I guess I'd say, a crafty player, right? He needs time to really set up his shots throughout the course of a rally, and I just don't think that is really going to work against Djokovic, who really can very quickly kind of take that pace for himself and dictate a rally. I just think that Musetti's going to find it very, very difficult to ever be the player in control against someone the likes of Djokovic. And, I think it's something you find a lot with players who are kind of have ability, but maybe are kind of a little lower tier. Maybe they're used to being able to kind of work their way through a rally and outsmart a player. And when you talk about the likes of a Djokovic or a Nadal, you're just not going to be able to do that. So until Musetti is able to, I think, tweak his game a little bit and find ways to just kind of be aggressive and take the reins in a rally, I think he's going to struggle against someone like a Djokovic. So no, I don't expect him to take a set off him. And to be honest, I don't even expect that match to be as close as I'm seeing many other people kind of putting it up as.
Yeah, and I think, look, you could maybe make a case that Musetti makes a flurry of maybe, and at a stretch, maybe 3 games in a row. It's hard. Novak doesn't really let people go on runs, particularly these younger players. So it is hard to see him kind of taking a set. We just do have I did mention yesterday on the account that we may have a special guest joining us on the stream as well, and I don't think this is a virtual background. Drew Dinzig, aka Whale Kappa, how are you, good sir? Looks quite nice there. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, of course. Sorry about that. Yeah, we are in the throes of summer here in Southern California, and could not ask for a more beautiful Sunday here, and enjoying the French Open so far. Very, very, very excited to get to the business end of this tournament.
Yeah, it's been a big 8 days, I think, overall. Any thoughts here? We've just been talking through the first quarter in particular. Obviously, Djokovic and Berrettini are the 3 that remain. Anyone outside of Novak appealing here?
I was kind of the opinion that the price on Novak to win the first quarter was value off the jump, because I thought this was just a relatively weak quarter overall. And at the same time, I backed Musetti, or not backed Musetti, but I took the over 28.5 games in this match tomorrow, just expecting it's going to be a hair competitive, especially early on. And now Candace is, shaking my confidence a little bit. She's made a lot of good points, and I just, I think I would like to see Musetti be aggressive early, get the best of Novak early on, but then fade into obscurity here. I think realistically it's probably 3-0 Novak, but I saw Novak at minus 5,000 on the money line, and that's really, really asking a lot for going up against a player like Musetti, who's clearly at his peak. This is the best he's ever played in his life. And if he can string together a couple of impressive, stretches, he could definitely steal a set here. So I think the over is the right way to play that. I would not touch the handicap, because realistically, like, the deeper this goes, the more likely you're going to get a 6. Let's say Musetti steals the first set, with a late break or even in a tie break. I could see, set 3, set 4 be 6-1, 6-1, 6-2, 6-0, something like that. So, the longer the match goes, the more it favors Novak. I think the over is the right way to attack, just on the basis of, like, I can't make Novak a minus 5,000 favorite against Musetti. Musetti's got some tools. He's got some skills. So it should be a ton of fun. And yeah, it's a shame we don't get to see Berrettini Federer, although I thought Berrettini was going to pretty clearly advance in that matchup. Much, much better clay player than Federer, even though there's a lot of similarity between those two players in general. And I think, as Candace pointed out, Berrettini, not a great matchup for Djokovic. I would expect Djokovic to get through relatively comfortably. And, if for whatever reason Djokovic has to labor a little bit more in his round 4 match, then that opens the door for Berrettini to do some damage early in that one. Maybe that goes a little longer than people expect. But I think Djokovic probably moves through pretty comfortably to the semifinal.
Yeah, I think that may be the case as well. I'm on Berrettini in the outright market, but I will be getting out of that, I think, as Novak comes through and these two are to meet in the quarterfinals. If we move to the second quarter, where a lot of people thought we would have Rafael Nadal, Yannick Sinner, Aslan Karatsev, and Andrei Rublev, and instead we have Diego Schwartzman and Jan-Lennard Struff. Interesting. I think, and something that I'm kind of glad that's seen happen, and we'll talk about it a bit in the women's side as well, is that we've had players who have caused early upsets and taken out seeds and have been able to actually go on with it. Jan-Lennard Struff's obviously an example of that. He was able to beat Andrei Rublev in 5 sets in that first round, beat Bagnes in the second, and then was able to beat Alcaraz as an underdog in the third. And this is probably the best stretch that we've probably seen, most consistent stretch, I think, from him. If we start and look at the top there, we'll start with you, Candice. Rafael Nadal versus Yannick Sinner. Rematch of last year. Do you see this one unfolding any differently?
Maybe not with the actual result. I mean, I see Nadal coming through. Sinner is so interesting because last year when he came close to taking that first set that went to the tiebreak against Nadal, it felt like he was coming out and he was this young, exciting guy who maybe didn't have the consistency yet, but he had all these highlight reel moments that caught everybody's attention. And it almost feels like this year, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost feels like there's like this bit of disappointment this year surrounding Jannik Sinner a little bit. Like people expected him to just continue on in that path when in reality, I think he's improved, just maybe not in the ways people wanted, right? People like those really aggressive highlight reel players. It's why you see someone like a Shapovalov all over Twitter every match of his. But what Sinner has done, in my mind, is add a lot of consistency to his game, maybe at the expense of some of those big moments that catch your eye. I expect this match to be closer. Now, I think he'll probably go down in straight sets, but I think it's going to be 3 tight sets. I was looking before we came on at some of the game's handicap lines. I mean, Sinner 7.5 plus 110. I mean, I'll play that all day long. I think that's the kind of match you're looking at here. 3 really tight sets where maybe Nadal never is threatened for the victory, but perhaps is never comfortable either.
And I think that's the thing when you look at Nadal and you look at Nadal on the clay as well. So many players, you look at it, and an example today is Rybakina against Serena Williams. You think of how nerve-wracking it is for players to kind of serve out these matches. We're seeing this with Nadal just to serve out sets against him. It's not even getting 3 of them. It's just kind of getting that one over the line. So it'll be interesting to see how he can handle that. My thoughts around Sinner is I think we've seen progression with him, and a lot of that has come from, I think, in years gone by or months gone by, he probably would have lost that first round match to Herbert. I think, he wasn't feeling well. He wasn't 100%, but he actually found a way to get through that. So I think he did take a step there, but obviously, compared to who Sinner's faced so far, this is a significant step up. Drew, any thoughts on this particular matchup? Are you on the other side of Candice again?
No. Candice and I are on the same page here. In fact, I got an early plus 8.5 at a reasonable juice, so I'm pretty excited. Market obviously moving in my direction here. I think this is going to be competitive. I think the fact that Sinner got to play him last year, not even last year, a year ago, but just 6 months ago in this same sort of environment is going to help him kind of keep his head to a degree. You bring up a great point. Like we've seen other kind of players who had opportunities to do something interesting against Nadal just completely melt given the pressure. And I would expect that Sinner is a little bit more calm, a little bit more cool-headed. Nadal still is flashing warning signs as I watch. Even having gotten here unscathed, there are still warning signs that I see with his game. Like when he is dominating and he knows he's going to win, he tends to build into his matches a little bit more. It looks to me, at least, like he is somewhat concerned about his ability to kind of sustained greatness, and he's coming out of the gate very aggressive and really trying to make sure, you know, he doesn't squander opportunities early, give his opponents an opportunity to get a foothold. So this first set is going to be wildly competitive. I cannot wait to see how these two match up in first set, especially considering how they looked, you know, just a couple months ago going, you know, head to head at Roland Garros. So it's going to be a fun one. I took the handicap. I think that the price is a little bit favorable for Sinner, although I wouldn't back him on the money line. Ultimately, I think Nadal gets through. And, you know, I was hopeful that Nadal was going to get a test here in round 4, a test in the quarterfinal. You know, maybe take some you know, some damage before he came up against Djokovic in the semifinal. But I'm losing a little bit of confidence that either Jan Lenny or Mighty Mouse is going to be able to put up much of a fight in the quarterfinal. So this is probably it for Nadal. He probably brings out his, you know, at his absolute, you know, best that he can. And I will just mention that the conditions are starting to favor Nadal to a degree. We're getting a little bit warmer. He's probably going to be put in the day matches. I'd be surprised if they put him again in the night matches, just considering that he's, you know, would much rather play in the daytime. So it's if they didn't put the Nadal Sinner in the primetime spot, I have a tough time seeing them put you know, Nadal and Jan Lenny or Diego in the primetime spot over the likes of the Djokovic Berrettini match, which is probably going to be a lot more, you know, draw a lot more interest.
Yeah, man. And I think, you know, as you said, you made a good point about the conditions starting to favour Nadal, and they certainly favour him compared to last year, when, you know, it was a lot heavier. It was obviously played in a completely different time of the year. I think that the conditions also favour Sinner a little bit more than what we saw last year, but, you know, it is going to be a fascinating first set, particularly between these two. And look, I tend to agree with both of you. I think the plus games for Sinner here is the play. Although one of my picks on the outright is Nadal, I'm fascinated to see how he responds to actually dropping a set and just having some form of adversity of some point. You know, when you look at how he's been playing in some of these other Grand Slams, when he's dropped sets, you know, the longer the matches go, he hasn't always looked fantastic. We just haven't seen that on clay, I think, with him for quite a while now. My interest is also down, I guess, in that Schwartzman versus Struff match, because I'm staring at Diego Schwartzman minus 4.5 games at plus 100, thinking, I know that I've just talked up Struff and his ability to get through to this fourth round, but there's a very, very good returner of serve at the other end of the court. Is that something that piques the interest of either of you?
I made a little bit of value on Struff, but Diego's playing so much better in this tournament than any of my priors coming into this. You know, like all of my 2021 data for Diego was basically telling me he's washed, and now he's actually playing a lot better than I expected. So I'm going to steer clear of this one and just see how it plays out. Ultimately, I think Struff is probably kind of getting close to the end of the line, but you know, he's a decent dirt baller, so who knows?
Definitely. Candace?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting match because you have Schwartzman, who you weren't alone, Drew. We all were saying, I don't know, this might be it for this guy. But, you know, give him credit. He had a draw that looked favorable from the outset, and he's been able to play well and take advantage. It's really nice to see this from Struff as well. I know at the beginning of the year, Steve, you and I several times in tournaments were saying, I really want to pick him to go far here, but he's not playing at the level we saw from him maybe a year or 18 months ago. So to see both of these guys come and show us some of that prior form is really, really nice. But I do like your play there, Steve. That's nice for Schwartzman. I have to favor him in that match, just as you say, from his returning ability alone. One last note I wanted to make on the Nadal front, because you were talking about how maybe he has struggled as of late in some of these longer matches on the rare occasions we've seen them, which is, again, something you don't hear a lot because it's not the traditional Nadal narrative. The one thing I want to remind as well, and we talked about it on here pretty extensively at the beginning of the clay court season, but one thing we saw from him as well is when he was facing adversity a few times, some of those self-inflicted with his serve, he had a tendency to get really, really, really frustrated on court, which is not something that we typically see from Nadal during his prime either. And perhaps that's something that we've seen playing a role in why he's struggled in some of these longer matches. It does seem like maybe, you know, we always thought of him as being kind of, you know, the Iceman, right? Nothing phases him. He just puts his head down and grinds every match and every point. And I'm not saying that that's not there, but maybe as he gets older and knows that the same endurance, it maybe isn't there within him physically, I think we see some of those mental frustrations come forward as well. Whether or not someone here prior to perhaps Djokovic is going to be able to push him to that point, I'm not sure, but it is something to keep in mind, because I do think, especially if you're watching mainstream coverage, you will hear some of those, I don't want to say lazy, but some of those really tried storylines. And I do see some of those things, signs of them changing with Nadal over the past 6 months to a year.
Definitely. Any more thoughts on the second quarter before we move through to talk about the quarterfinal from the third quarter? Alexander Zverev against Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. Didn't expect this, personally. But along the way, can I just say I have probably never felt grateful for a winning bet before as much as Casper Ruud minus 5.5 against Fokina. To be able to cover 5.5 whilst losing in 5 sets is one of the more impressive feats I think I've seen.
All-timer.
And just the way that match unfolded, and for it to end up like that. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw the notification saying that he'd lost 3 sets to 2, and then I opened up the app and went, hang on, I had to do that math like 3 times. Like, hang on, I think we're still actually okay here. But look, Fokina did pretty well, I think, yesterday. He was obviously very, very nervy late in that match against Delbonis. I think it was 2 sets and a breakup, and then faced a number of break points serving out the match there in the 4th set. Alexander Zverev obviously lost 6 games to Nishikori, really kind of turned the Jets on late in that first set, and it was all one-way traffic from there. Might start with you, Candace. Thoughts here on this particular matchup as a quarterfinal?
I'm not sure it's going to be the most appetizing of a watch. I do think Zverev should win it fairly comfortably. He's been playing at a nice level throughout the course of the tournament. But, just to speak a bit to Davidovich Fokina, because, I'll tell you what, when you talk again about this kind of younger crop of guys who it feels like everybody's been waiting for, right? Somebody to make an impression against that older, top group. He's never, ever, ever been one that gets a mention, and he's a guy who we've seen just steadily improve, right? You look to 2019 when he was, breaking through on the challenger level, 2020 when he was able to make it to the 4th round of the US Open, and then 2021, now in the top 50. It's just been such a steady progression from him, and he has been all guts this tournament. I mean, to make it through, we're talking multiple 5-set matches, and to beat Delbonis, like, I agree, he was very nervy. You could tell he was feeling the moment there at the end, trying to make it through to a quarterfinal. But that's no easy match. Delbonis has had such a productive clay court season. He obviously had a big victory coming into that as well. So, I mean, you wonder if this is the type of tournament that even if he goes down tamely to Zverev, is really going to kind of push him forward to that next level. And I'm excited to see it. He's a fun, exciting player, has been for some time, but came into this, not necessarily playing incredibly well, but an improved level overall. But he's just been a joy to watch this tournament. So I think for me, that's more where I want to focus, because I don't necessarily think that, he's going to do anything incredible against Zverev, but it's been a fine tournament from the young man.
Definitely. Drew, any thoughts on this particular matchup?
Yeah, so I was waiting for the right opportunity to fade Delbonis, because I just I never bought into the form we saw from him, leading into this tournament, and I was just waiting for that right time. And it was today, backing Davidovich on the money line, and I got my win against Delbonis, and he is now dispatched, and that is fine. Now Zverev, on the other hand, I thought Nishikori was going to be able to put up a little bit more of a fight, especially considering he only really played that one set in his previous match, so he was a little more well rested. And Zverev tends to make a mess of these best of 5, but he was extremely sharp. And Nishikori could do nothing with his first serve. It was kind of embarrassing how how many points he lost on first serve, to be honest, even in that first set where he was somewhat competitive. And, Nishikori clearly so far from his peak that we've seen in years past. But what I'm kind of interested to see here is how the market responds to that. Like, do they finally buy in on him, right? Does the market, because the market faded Zverev today. They faded him a number of times this tournament. Like, nobody really believes in this guy to actually put together a clean run. If they finally do buy in, does that make for another opportunity to come back on the underdog at long last? Because he's the kind of guy that like the mental part of the game seems to affect him more than a lot of the other players. And even though he is the much more talented of the two tennis players in this match, just the fact that this is potentially his first ever semifinal appearance at the French Open, and just what what best of 5 tennis does to him mentally compared to best of 3. I mean, I'm prepared to still pull the trigger on Zverev's fade. I just need to see what the market does here in terms of price. If Zverev starts to drift, if he finds market support here and this goes in his direction, I'll probably come back on Fokina in some way.
And I think there probably will be that support with Zverev. And I think when you look at I think they met in the US Open last year as well, and it was 2-2-1. But I think Fokina rolled his ankle really early in that match and kind of played really, really hampered for the entire thing. So I don't think you can take that for what the scoreline suggests there. I think it's going to be an interesting match, and I'm also curious to kind of see over the next 24 hours what happens. I think with the money in that market there. What I am more interested in is the fourth quarterfinal. So I don't think. I think I've done the maths on this, but I'm not 100% sure. I think if Medvedev makes the final of Roland Garros and Novak doesn't, Medvedev's world number 1.
What? Really?
And I don't think that's been spoken about overly much. But he's found a way. He's finally decided Daniil Medvedev's pushed all the pressure off himself in the lead up. He said he's not good on clay. He doesn't want any expectation there. And now he's blown his way through to the quarterfinals and faces a player who has all the pressure on him in Tsitsipas, who has struggled notoriously against Medvedev over the years. I was talking to Candace before we jumped on the show that I really want this match to be that night session one, no crowd. I want commentary off. I just want to be able to hear what they're saying to each other and what's kind of unfolding on court, because these two have had their fair share of fireworks over the years. It's a really interesting, I think, pricing up of it. I think when I last looked at, we had so Tsitsipas is giving up 4.5 games here, and it's looking at Medvedev around plus 200. When I start with you, Candace, any value there at either the money line or the spread at first look?
I'm not looking to play this match. I'm looking to jump back in from an outright perspective with Medvedev, which I never thought I would say. I think I actually picked him as the most overvalued player in the tournament coming into this. So that tells you something about how me and a lot of us viewed his form coming into this. But he has been sensational. I've been so impressed from the form turnaround that we've seen from him. You mentioned that Tsitsipas has often struggled against him in the past. And while you give credit to Tsitsipas being, a different player, this clay court swing than we've ever seen from him, I just think the level we've been seeing from Medvedev is better. And knowing that the winner of this match, we expect it to be close, we expect it to potentially go long, but the winner of this match likely goes against a player who mentally really, really struggles in big moments and in best of 5. To me, the winner of this match, even if it's a very competitive long match, is going to be in the final. And so when you're looking at it back from an outright perspective, the discrepancy between Tsitsipas and Medvedev for mine at the moment is way too big. So to me, that's the obvious play. It's to just go back in from an outright perspective, take Medvedev, knowing that discrepancy is too large, and go from it from that perspective.
Definitely. And Drew.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. And as a person who has enormous liability on Tsitsipas, I might be doing the same. My biggest play coming into this tournament was Tsitsipas to win quarter four at plus 100. I hit that as hard as I could everywhere that I had action available. And I really did not expect to see this from Medvedev, and he does look good. I will also just kind of point out a couple things, though. I have Tsitsipas coming into this tournament. I have him as the third best men's player on clay, slightly behind Djokovic. And then there is a huge gap between Tsitsipas and the fourth best. And this takes into account Dominic Thiem's form this year. In a normal year, maybe I would have Thiem in that same conversation. But whatever the case is, Tsitsipas's clay form has been spectacular. But Candace brings up a great point, which is, Medvedev is basically Djokovic light. He gets everything back. Everything comes back. I will also say Tsitsipas is kind of Federer light in that, the way he attacks, the style of his game, the way he tends to try to, dictate pace and control points is very Federer-like in my mind. He's obviously a much better clay player than Federer ever was, but that's kind of beside the point. It is interesting to note though that Federer always struggled with Djokovic, and Tsitsipas to this point has always struggled with Medvedev. I would only kind of add to this mix though. The weather's getting warmer. It's going to be a lot easier for a good clay player. It's going to be a lot easier to find the winners, right? I think some of Medvedev's success to this point in the tournament has been aided by the conditions have been just that much slower. It's been that much harder to hit it past him, right? He's been able to get back shots that otherwise he never would have. And, with the conditions getting a little bit warmer, a little bit faster, even at night, I still think Tsitsipas ought to be a meaningful favorite in this match. I made it Tsitsipas minus 227. I gave him about 69.5% chance to win this one. I saw some openers in the minus 150, minus 175 range, and I was awestruck, oh my gosh, they're really going to make me get more down on Tsitsipas, even though I'm leveraged beyond belief for him to win this quarter, to get to the final. But the market has moved enough now that I think it's starting to get pretty close to fair price. I'm going to see what the order of play looks like. I'm going to see what time they get this match off and what the weather's looking like. But I'm probably right now leaning Tsitsipas gets through relatively comfortably. Medvedev, his path has been pretty favorable. Tsitsipas has been getting better at each step of the way, which I like. He obviously had kind of a long vision of hey, I'm going to build my way into this tournament. I'm not going to, put my best stuff out there on the court and blow, overdo it early on here. I need to save some of my bullets. Well, now you're going to have to use some of your bullets. You're going to have to beat a player that's beaten you a bunch. And I think ultimately, Tsitsipas gets through here comfortably. I'll probably play some 3-0. To add to my stack of liability on him. But I think he gets through. You know what this actually reminds me of? Remember last year's U.S. Open where Medvedev, played Rublev in the quarterfinal? And it was, there was some people making a case for Rublev, and Rublev was playing his best we'd ever seen. And it was still but, on this surface, in this conditions, this is Medvedev's match to lose. I feel somewhat similarly that this is Tsitsipas's match to lose. And, I think with him kind of, building his way into this tournament, and Medvedev kind of, he's already proven it. He's gotten some wins at Roland Garros, which is what he came here to do. I don't know that the urgency is going to be especially high if he finds himself down 2-0 to really dig in and try to fight his way back into this match. So I'm going to play some Tsitsipas alt markets for some big prices and see what happens.
Yeah, I personally, with this match, I don't think I'm going to get involved until I do see that order of play. I think if it's a night session, it does favour Tsitsipas quite a lot more if it's not going to be as high bouncing and as lively a court. Yeah, look, it's certainly going to be an interesting match here, I think, to wrap up the fourth quarter. Now, just before we finish up for the men, if you had to pick one player from here to win, Candace?
I would pick Medvedev, and I just double checked.
Oh, man.
18 to 1. 18 to 1. I mean,
Wow.
when I was speaking about the discrepancy, I mean, just keep in mind, Tsitsipas, most places right now you're seeing 4-5. So between him at 4 or 5 to 1 versus Medvedev at 18 to 1. Again, it's how you view the match. If you're saying night match, I think Tsitsipas wins comfortably, well, then that's a different perspective. But if you are someone looking at this match and you think it's going to be close, and that's how I view it, then when you're talking 4-5 to 1 versus 18, I mean, that's stupid.
Yeah, fair enough. Can he beat Nadal?
That's the tricky part, right? That's the tricky part. I mean,
if he could do
you
it,
would
at the
want
US
someone
Open, I
like
don't
him,
know.
right? A very solid returner of serve like him.
Yeah. Drew, who are you picking for the outright from here? Are you sticking with Tsitsipas?
Yeah, I'm gonna take Djokovic over Tsitsipas in 5 in the final.
Interesting. That would be certainly an interesting final. It would be good to have a final that does last more than 3 sets for a change.
Yeah.
No bagels, please.
What's funny is we're talking about how much the order of play is going to matter for the Tsitsipas Medvedev match. It's really going to matter, in my opinion, for the Djokovic Nadal. They're going to put that thing in prime time, I'm guessing. And if they do, that swings the balance in Djokovic's favor more than I think Nadal would like. And it will be fascinating to see how that factors into the pricing in the market, and et cetera.
Definitely, it should be an interesting couple of days, I think, to finish off this tournament on the men's side. Now, before we go into the women's, I think this is where we bid farewell to Candice for today.
Yeah.
Over
got to work the real job.
Hey, best of luck.
Thank you.
Don't you hate it when work gets in the way?
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much for taking the time today, though, to go through that. Just a quick one. Women's, if you had to pick one player from here.
Oh, man. That from the pure chaos that we've seen thus far. I mean, I picked Swiatek to win in the beginning. She's done nothing to dissuade me from that. So I will stay there.
Sounds more than fair enough.
Okay.
Alrighty, we will chat to you soon.
Bye.
And
Cheers.
we can forge on whilst fighting dying battery life, but we can move on quickly to the women's. We've got the first quarter up.
Yeah, I want to hear your
screen.
takes on the women's side, man. You've been laser dialed in on this women's so far. So what are your takes?
Well, this quarter we started with Barty, Pliskova, Brady, and Svitolina, and we've ended with Jabeur, Goff, Stevens, and Krejcikova.
Classic.
So it's been a little bit of a whirlwind. Obviously, Barty was one of my outrights, which was unfortunate. She picked up a different injury to the injury she came in with.
Yeah.
Probably also shows a little bit about the mental game, I think, of Bernarda Pera in that first round to not be able to beat her while she was so far below 100%. But that's a story for another time. I think looking at this and looking at obviously we've got Coco and Krejcikova are the two favorites, I think, in these two matches here for today. Jabeur, can be a little bit crafty, and does have a couple of, I guess, strings to her bow in terms of her game. My big question with her has always been her first serve percentage and whether she can get it high enough. I think that gets exacerbated and exaggerated a little bit on clay. Obviously, Drew's battery's died, so I'm just going to keep working through myself, I think, here through the women's section. When you look at it, we've got Jabeur. I don't see her being a threat to Coco. I think Coco's made some significant steps in the right direction, particularly around her first serve and bringing that power to her game. I don't think you can read too much into that win over Brady, which involved the retirement, because it was a little bit hard to gauge how Brady was feeling from the start there. I think that the big story out of this quarter is when you look at what Sloane Stevens has been able to produce. Obviously, she's had a horrid run off court with her personal life over the last 12 to 18 months with everything that's gone on. It's great to see her be able to kind of bring that together with some decent form here at the French Open. I think she's a sneaky chance against Krejcikova if she brings a similar level to what we saw against Mahova in the previous round. But Krejcikova is the one that has kind of surprised overall. I think she was obviously the better player for the majority of that match against Svitolina. I think that was a game at 4-3 there that went for about 20 minutes, and it was really one-way traffic, I think, from that point onwards. I would be more interested, I think, in getting involved in an outright in some way, shape, or form here. and looking at this comment from Trevor that Sloane, yeah, she is certainly playing well, and it is nice to see. I think she's, she might have been suffering a little bit, I think, with injury and then motivation, I think, last year, which is completely understandable with everything that's gone on. It's going, I think, looking at this, as I said, I'd be more interested in getting involved in this quarter if this quarter wasn't on the same half as Swiatek. I think whoever gets out of here, is probably going to need to face Swiatek in the semi-final, so it doesn't make it as appealing, I think, from an outright perspective. I'll just try and pull up the odds that are currently at a local bookmaker here, just to kind of explain, because obviously Swiatek is around that, plus 100 or $2 in the market, which is just an incredibly short price given, and it's probably justified based on her form both here last year and to start this year. But looking through, we've got Coco at 18-1, Sloane at 25-1, Krejcikova at 23-1, and Jabeur at 55-1. So there's certainly some big prices there, but I think this is probably the hardest quarter, I think, now to gauge on what's going to happen. I think if Stevens maintains her form, I think she's a big threat here to Krejcikova. I'm going to probably completely avoid that Coco versus Jabeur match, just because, as I said, that too much is probably reliant on that first serve of Jabeur. I think Coco should be too good there on what we've seen. I don't think Jabeur has the game to be able to exploit, I guess, the weaknesses that can come with Coco on clay. When I say weaknesses, they are little weaknesses, and it's amazing to think of, how far she's been able to progress given her age at the moment. So it is a little bit of a tough one, but I'd probably, you almost have to say that, maybe Coco gets through here. I'd be fascinated, and I'm probably considering a plus game handicap play here on Sloane Stevens in this particular matchup as well. I just need to take a quick look at the weather conditions in Paris for today. Moving to the second quarter, which is probably one of the more interesting pockets here. I talked before about Zidansek and Struff as players who have been able to cause upsets early in the tournament, and how great it's been to see them kind of continue on and really use that as a springboard instead of falling in the second round. Marta Kostyuk's another one who's been able to do that. She knocked off Muguruza in the first round and has been able to make her way through here now to the fourth round. That's going to be a really tough match against Swiatek, and I think that the night session probably doesn't help Kostyuk. I think that's Swiatek should be able to handle that, I think, relatively comfortably. I'm not going to be getting involved in that match, but given I've still got some outright plays around on Badosa, Rybakina, and Sakkari, I'd be more than happy to see Kostyuk cause that upset there. So there's been a couple of comments, I think, around the doubles. I'm not too worried, I think, about the doubles and the time spent on court. It's exceptionally hot. The energy that you exert in the doubles probably doesn't quite match, I guess, what we're seeing in singles. But I think it's an interesting question mark, I think, for Swiatek and around her decision making to continue with the doubles. I think we've seen some other players, such as Sabalenka, kind of step away from doubles to really focus on singles. So it'll be interesting to kind of see if it does impact her. But she's been so far and away dominant, through these early rounds. I think she was down a break to Kontaveit and still gets out of that 7-6, 6-love. So she gets all day, gets the night session. She should be too good there. I think we may see the end of the run for Sofia Kenin here. I think she's had a pretty favourable draw leading through to this point. I think when you look at Sakkari, she's had a couple of long, grueling matches, but she's been able to come through them, whereas perhaps she would kind of falter, I guess. Looking at years gone by, that Sakkari-Mertens match in the third round, she drops that second set tiebreak. We'd normally see her really struggle to kind of bounce back in the third. So it's been great to see her to kind of take that next step forward. I think Sakkari and the way that she's been a little bit more aggressive this year, I think that's really going to help her here on the clay against Kenin in particular. She can play with a relative amount of margin. I'm just not sure Kenin has the power to hit through the defensive ability of Sakkari here. So I'd be certainly looking at Sakkari at the game handicap here. And I think that's probably the hardest matchup, I think, for Swiatek looking through this quarter. Trevor's got a good question around, Tritek's kryptonite at this point of her career. I think she's made significant gains in the last probably 12 to 18 months in particular, where they've been able to hit with a little bit more margin. I think those kind of counter-punching players who can cover the court a little better and force her to maybe hit with a little less margin is probably where her kryptonite is at the moment. And I think, you can make a case of looking back to Halep versus her at the Australian Open. I think it's those players that if she doesn't feel like she's hitting winners as comfortably as she has been in previous matches, that it can get a little bit messy for her, because she does try to force the issue a little bit and her unforced errors do go up. But the fact, playing on the clay and looking at what she's been able to do, she's certainly making better decisions on court. She's not going for winners as early as perhaps we saw, that 18 months ago. She's able to know that she's got the movement, she's got the ability to kind of cover the court and pick her spots a little bit better. So, look, it's a small weakness, but it's going to be interesting to see if Kostyuk can kind of hang with her for long enough here. And again, when you look at her form over the last, looking at Roland Garros last year, but then also looking at this year, she hasn't really been challenged. She hasn't found that point of challenge in a Grand Slam, deep in a third set. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there as she gets closer to kind of defending her championship here. So as I said, I'm probably not going to be getting involved in Kostyuk, because if Kostyuk, were to somehow spring an upset of some sort, that's going to be great news for the Badosa and Rybakina outrights that are currently sitting in the bottom half. Another question from Trevor. I've seen commentary that Coco has one of the fastest serves on tour. Is that accurate? Yes, it is. So I think her stats at the moment are pretty much on a par with Sabalenka in terms of her first serve speed, which, look, she's always been around the mark. She's been a little bit slower than those top players, but I think when you look at what the key thing she's been able to do is kind of drop her double fault rate and her ability to kind of just get that second ball in. She was giving away too many cheap points early this year and late last year, and you just can't do that, I think, at the top level, particularly as we get to the pointy end of Grand Slam. So it'd be interesting to see if she can remain. I guess she's obviously going to be able to maintain that pace, but I guess with that pace, making sure that she can maintain a relatively high first serve percentage. Now, moving to the third quarter, which had Sabalenka, Azarenka, Kvitova, and Serena, and we've ended up with Rybakina and Pavlyuchenkova. It's going to be, obviously, when you look at the four players that are left here in the women's draw, it's going to be an interesting couple of matches. Pavlyuchenkova has looked great. I thought when she took that medical timeout at 1-set-all with Sabalenka, I thought that was probably going to be it for her. But her response to be able to kind of flip that into a 6-love to her advantage, and to then come back from a set down against Azarenka, and she did struggle in that first set when she was facing break points, but she played the tight moments far and away better in that second and third set. So full credit to her for adding another quarterfinal to her resume for her career. Looking to the top part of this quarter, I think that's probably the first time in recent memory that I've seen a player at a Grand Slam face Serena Williams and not look overly phased by who was at the other end of the net, at the other end of the court. I think when you look at what Rybakina was able to do, she came out straight away, held to love, and kind of said, look, right, I'm here, I'm going to hit big. Her forehand down the line was looking exceptional. Her form has looked great across the course of this, across the course of the fortnight, coming in off pretty average form in the lead up. But it's amazing how quickly things can change here. I think when you look at this, she did get a little bit nervous, I think, in that, I think it was 4-3 in the second set when she dropped it there, but then she responded by serving and holding really well at 4-5, and then was able to get the win there in the end. I'm hoping from an outright perspective that we get Rybakina, I think, playing in the day, or in relatively decent conditions for this quarterfinal. I will probably be siding with her looking at the current prices. I think Rybakina is about $1.70 or -135. I don't think when you look at this when we've got and Trevor's comment about the two being doubles partners. I don't think, we do see this a little bit across some of the players. We've got Mertens and Sabalenka who've played a lot together. There's a lot of big names who are starting to play, a little bit more doubles. I don't think it's too much of an issue for either player here. But I think, looking at it overall, I think Pavlyuchenkova's run has been great. Maybe I overreacted and thought the Azarenka form, off not a lot of tennis coming in, was perhaps a little bit. I thought it was a little bit better than it perhaps was. So when you roll back through it, I think I'm more impressed with what Rybakina has been able to produce across these 4 rounds than Pavlyuchenkova. But that's not to say that, I think when we look at this point, Pavlyuchenkova has the experience of being to this part of a Grand Slam a number of times before. So it'll be interesting to see how this match pans out. I think Rybakina will need to get off to a good start. But I think, if we saw, and what we saw from her here is particularly early against Serena, if she can bring that level again, I think this is going to be a great spot for Rybakina, but I'm not going to be counting out Pavlyuchenkova, as Trevor said here in the chat. She had a similar run in Madrid, I think at the altitude. She's played well against some bigger strikers of the ball, but I think when you look through a lot of those matches, those bigger strikers were incredibly wayward with their striking, high unforced errors throughout. And I think if Rybakina can find a way to stay, particularly on that forehand down the line, which works so well against Serena, and exploiting her movement, I think that's going to be a really key spot and a key kind of shot-to-shot matchup in this one. Moving down to the 4th quarter, where we have another live outright still kicking after saving a match point in round 2? No, round 3 against Anna Bogdan, is Paula Badosa, who got through in 3 sets against Vondrousova. Looked to be the more consistent, I think, throughout there, and was really, really strong late. I think Vondrousova's forehand went a little bit wayward in that 3rd set. So it's great to see her make her way through. And I think if there was one player in particular to have made the most of, the withdrawal of Alison Risk, who's playing Nottingham this week, it's been Badosa. When you look through this draw, Badosa was meant to be facing Towson in the 1st round, Azarenka probably in the 2nd round. Instead, she's had a pretty good run through here. I think she's got that mix of being able to cover the court well, but also being relatively powerful. I think she's playing with great margin, and obviously the confidence that's come with her wins in the lead up have been. It has been an impressive stretch. I think when you look at Badosa and you look at Kostyuk in particular, those were 2 players who started the year really, really well before they came to Melbourne. And what happened with hard quarantine in Melbourne obviously threw them about a little bit, and it took them a little while to recover. Obviously Kostyuk a little more, because I think in March she ended up with COVID, and it did cause some symptoms for her, and she did have to miss some time training. But they've both certainly taken steps in the right direction here, and it's great to see them rewarded with some decent results. The other one is, Tamara Zidansek, the shot that she played. Well, actually, it's a bit of a sliding doors moment here. Bianca Andreescu served for the match against her in that 1st round. She could have very well been out of the tournament in round 1 and playing the tournament in bowl this week. She's made her way through. She's looked pretty good in particularly tight moments. She dropped a set 6 loves to Siniakova and responded with that tie break in the 2nd. She hit a great forehand passing shot, or forehand winner, down set point to Castella in the 1st set there before going on to take the tie break. She's playing really, really well. This is going to be a fascinating matchup. I'm not really sure yet how I plan on playing it overall. I think it's going to be a little bit of a wait and see around the weather as well, and when they schedule this match. I think Badosa should be too strong. I'm just a little bit wary, I think, looking particularly now that there's 4 players in this half remaining, and I have outrights on 2 of them. It's trying to figure out how to best play that, keeping in mind those prices that we've been able to get for both players. So it will be an interesting match. I think they're 2 very worthy quarterfinalists, even if their rankings don't quite do them justice. So it'll be an interesting match to see. And look, I'm looking forward to seeing who out of Badosa, Zidansek, Rybakina, or Pavlyuchenkova makes the final here, because I think there's great stories, I think, for all of them. And particularly Pavlyuchenkova, given her career, and a lot have said that she's probably underwhelmed for long periods of her career, but she's also put together some pretty impressive runs, to quarterfinals, to the last 8 of a number of Grand Slams. So it will be interesting to see how that kind of pans out. When you look at the odds for the tournament from here, so we've got Iga Swiatek at $1.96, Badosa at $6.80, Rybakina $15, Coco Gauff $19, Pavlyuchenkova $27, Kenin $34, and I've just missed Sloane Stevens and Zachary, who are both at 26s with Krejcikova. So it's pretty even, I think, through there, but it's very, very even outside of one particularly big name there in Swiatek, who's obviously going to be very, very tough to beat. I think with these two outrights down here, I think I'm going to kind of see what happens today. Who knows, Kostyuk could cause an upset and everyone's odds are going to wind in. I don't think it's going to happen, but I won't complain if it does happen. And then kind of make a little bit of a call around these respective matches. It would be nice to have, someone with an outright in their 20s and an outright in the 80s meeting in a semi-final here to be able to kind of set up for a final. But, they're both favorites, so what could possibly go wrong in the lead up into here? So look, if I had to pick of the 4 players here to who's the best chance, I think it's probably most down to if Rybakina can bring her best level. I think she is the one to beat out of the 4. But I think if you wanted a more consistent, know what you're going to get at the level and what you're going to see from them on court, I can completely understand why Paula Badosa is the price that she is. I think she's going to give the most consistent effort. She's going to really thrive off the fact that she's had some really recent tough matches. She's played a final recently, albeit, ending with an injury. And she's played recent matches against Barty and some top players, and it's all going to help here, I think, for her. So look, I'm hoping for a Rybakina Badosa semi-final, but they're both going to need to be playing very, very well, even though they are both currently sitting at favourites. And looking to the top again, as I said, playing these markets and having Zachary as well at longer odds, it all is kind of dependent a bit on what happens with Swiatek. They're all kind of capable on their day, but it's trying to figure out and be realistic that you don't want these prices to kind of come through and not end up with anything out of it as a result. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the tournament unfolds. Comment from Trevor: does the reintroduction of crowds help any players in particular? I think we're looking at the crowds that have been there at the moment. There are a few players that feed off the crowds a little more. I think one that was particularly noticeable the other day was Mazzetti against his fellow countryman. I think he is obviously someone who thrives off kind of any feedback from the crowd as to hitting, particularly good shots. Looking to the women's side, I don't think so. I think the limited crowd probably helped Rybakina yesterday. I think she's quite ruthless and just kind of gets the job done. But, again, here in the chat, Trevor raised a really good point of needing to see how Swiatek responds from a set down. Can she roll through 2 straight Roland Garroses? It's going to be interesting to see whether that is something that can actually unfold here. A little bit like Nadal, we haven't seen her find herself in any spots of significant trouble. It's going to be a tough... I want to see how they respond in adversity, but also at the same time, there's every chance that we won't see it at all because of just how dominant she has been playing. I think it's a big, big plus for her that she's playing Kostyuk in the night session today, which is a little bit disappointing. But I don't think there's anyone, going back to that question about the crowds, I don't think there's anyone who's really feeding off them a lot outside of maybe, you could maybe make a case in other parts of the world that it's maybe Novak, but you're never going to get a pro Novak crowd at Roland Garros against Rafael Nadal. It's just not going to happen. So it will be interesting to see kind of what unfolds in that little pocket there. So look, to sum everything up, there's still big opportunities for both players in the men's and the women's, particularly in the bottom halves of the draw, to make a Grand Slam final. One of Zidansek, Badosa, Pavlyuchenkova, or Rybakina will make it. Medvedev has a chance. I think if he makes the final and Novak doesn't make the final, that he's world number one. So that's obviously going to be a big. I think that will become apparent to him now as a motivation that he just needed to play a couple of really good tournaments where he's perhaps lacked in recent years, and he was really able to bridge that gap. So I think to summarize off, I think looking at particularly for the matches for tonight, I'll just quickly roll through them before the previews come up later. I think if I had to pick a side for Schwartzman and Struff, I'd probably be looking towards Schwartzman at the minus 4.5 games. Djokovic versus Musetti is probably a match that I'm going to be sitting out. I think Musetti will be able to kind of play some streaky patches, but I think ultimately Novak should be too good. I'm more inclined to look at the +8 games. I think it is for Jannik Sinner against Nadal. I think, although the conditions do suit Nadal a little more this year, they also suit Sinner. And I think he's probably the biggest threat, I think, to Rafa in that quarter. So I think he can keep it close with maybe a tiebreak or a 4-6, which should kind of put him in relatively decent shape here, or even take a set. Looking to the women's for tonight. So I'm just getting the odds up now. I'd probably be looking to, if I can get a decent price for a +3.5 on Sloane Stephens, I'll probably look at taking that. The Jabeur versus Gauff match, I'm probably going to avoid, although there is an inkling to maybe look towards an over games there. But I need to look into that a little bit more today. And the Maria Sakkari -3 looks to be probably the play there. I think she's got too many tools on clay for Sofia Kenin. The only question mark, and probably what will limit me on going a little bit heavier on Sakkari, is the fact that obviously Kenin has made, she's won a Grand Slam. She's made a final here last year. She knows kind of what the pointy end of Grand Slams look like and what is involved in them, whereas Sakkari is probably starting to find herself in uncharted territory and has been a little bit patchy at times. So that's probably where I'd be looking for those. I don't think there's any value at the moment in the Kostyuk-Swiatek match, looking at the game spreads about +6 and the total being 18.5. So yeah, looking at probably the plays today being Diego at the minus, Sakkari at the minus, and Sinner at the plus, with potentially and also I'll be looking to keep an eye on that order of play for tomorrow, particularly around that Medvedev versus Tsitsipas match. I think if it's the night session, I think that is going to be something that will certainly favour Tsitsipas. So we'll see what happens there. I think we might wrap it up there if there aren't any more questions. Thanks for everyone for joining in. Thanks for Candice and Drew for popping in before they had to head out. I'm looking to be back potentially tomorrow with a couple of other guests to talk through, I guess, what's been happening and get their thoughts as well on the quarterfinals onwards in this draw. So hopefully it should be around probably this time tomorrow to be able to kind of get them on and have a little bit of a chat and see where their head's at after 9 days of Roland Garros. So if you do have any questions or anything, don't be afraid to jump on to @EatSleepTennis or to my personal account at @ace_previews. I'm more than happy to discuss any players or thoughts on any matches you may like. And as always, good luck again for the 9th day of Roland Garros. It's obviously a very, very big patch here. It's 21 days now until Wimbledon main draw gets underway. So it's all systems go on the tennis front, and we will I'll catch you tomorrow, and we'll hopefully have Candice and Alex back on deck, hopefully a little later this week, maybe.